This meeting will be webcast and a record retained on the Council website for up to 2 years. By participating in this meeting, you are consenting for your name, the content of what you say and your image to be broadcast and stored to the Council website. If any member, officer or member of the public addressing the committee has concerns with this, please contact the Committee Services Officer immediately. For those at home viewing the webcast, I would like to inform you that if you look above the video, you will see a Resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear in the right-hand side. This will allow you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and debate. I'd like to move on to apologies. I have Councillor Paul Stewart and Councillor Carl Greeny will deputise.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Steve Hayes, and I'm deputising for him.
Thanks, Moira. Okay, Members' Code of Conduct. Members, I'd now like to ask you to consider whether you have any disclosable pecuniary interests and or any relevant interest in connection with any of the items on the agenda, and if so, to declare them and state the nature of the interest. Councillor McLaughlin.
On agenda item 6, Chair, and I think it's a prejudicial interest, and I'll leave the room while it's been discussed.
Thank you. No one else? Item number 4, minutes. So I'd like to ask members to approve the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting dated the 9th of June 2021. Does anyone have an issue with the minutes? Can we all agree? The accuracy, thank you. I haven't received any public questions, any statements or petitions, any questions by members. And so we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is key and other decisions, home working allowance. And I'd like to invite Chair Halewood to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Tony Williams, the Assistant Director for HR and OD, is going to present this report to the committee.
Okay, good afternoon, Chair and to the councillors of the committee. This report relates to the potential implementation of a home working allowance. And the report sets out the issues and implications relating to the implementation of a home working allowance and the detail and eligibility criteria should the Policy and Resources Committee agree to implement an allowance this evening. It is recommended that the P&R Committee consider the options, issues and implications set out within the report and the detail of the draft policy and eligibility criteria that have been developed at Appendix A and consider whether to implement a homework allowance based on that policy and criteria. Reasons for recommendations, the committee will be well aware that the Council has moved to a hybrid working model over the last 15 months. Where significant numbers of staff will have the option to work at home regularly, combined with some attendance at offices and site visits as required. The trade unions have requested that the Council formally consider the implementation of a homework allowance for staff, and it was appropriate that this request is considered by this committee. In terms of other options considered, there is no obligation for the Council as an employer to pay a homework allowance or meet the costs of homeworking that may be incurred by employees. And as such, officers' position has been maintained the position we've adopted, which is to signpost employees to apply to claim tax relief from HMRC. And there's no cost to the Council for this, and all employees are eligible to apply. And additionally, any staff who have concerns about the cost of homeworking can choose to work for Council building. The report sets out some background information, which I'm sure the committee will be aware in terms of since the start of the pandemic, almost 2,000 council staff working at home in line with government advice. This has been very successful, and certainly as the report sets out that is kind of our direction of travel for future, with staff working this hybrid model of working, which would include a combination of working at home, attending office and site visits as required. And we've set out that we're keen to offer the employees a degree of personal choice about where they work, as long as business need continues to be met. There is a strong appetite for the workforce to retain this option for home working. A survey we undertook in November 2020 indicated that over 92% of those employees who responded indicated a preference to work at home for 3 or more days a week. Whilst we will be encouraging hybrid working and we see lots of benefits in it, it's not the intention of the council to impose that on employees, and it's acknowledged that not all employees can work at home comfortably or may not have an appropriate home environment to do so, and we will be making office accommodation available for staff who wish to come in. Following some discussions, the trade unions request that the council considers the payment of a home working allowance and put forward the case around the financial hardship on some employees who have to meet the cost of additional heating and utility bills, particularly over the course of the winter months. And you may be aware that at national level, trade unions have included this in their pay claim for 21-22, which at the moment isn't resolved. In response, we haven't agreed to the request to introduce an allowance. I've set out the reasons for that within the report. Again, I've covered some of those already, but there have been relatively few issues raised directly by employees. We've signposted staff to the HMRC option. We've said that staff can come in if they wish to do so. And personal circumstances do vary for people who are working at home as to whether there are any financial implications or not. And I've set out in those reasons in 3.7. As this is a policy decision affecting the workforce with a potential budget implication, it is appropriate that this issue is considered by committee, and this was a request by the leader of the council for us to do that. We have done some work with the trade unions to draft a potential policy, and that's attached in your report at Appendix A, and that sets out the criteria that if we were to introduce a policy that we would look to put in place. And we've undertaken quite a comprehensive piece of work to do that, and that's, as I say, set out in Appendix. Section 4 sets out the financial implications if a home work allowance was to be implemented. This is just indicative really, because as we've explained, it's not possible to predict with accuracy how many employees would be eligible to make the claim for the allowance, or would do so because of the wide variety and change in personal circumstances, some of the information which we don't have from employees. But we have put a figure in of 80,000 per annum as a cost, as a working cost, if you like. And then we've set out the relevant risks, etc., in the report as in section 7. I don't think there's anything to add to that, Chair, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Do I have any questions? Okay. Comments? Tom?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions. Have we done a staff survey and to see how much have taken up the HMRC allowance, and do we know when the trade unions will finish the negotiation for the 22?
Through you, Chair. We haven't done that specific piece of work around the HMRC allowance. It is a matter between the employee and HMRC. So we wouldn't normally kind of assess that information. In terms of the second question, there's no resolution as yet. I know there's been an offer made by the national employers, but doesn't include the implementation of a home work allowance. But at the moment, the negotiations are ongoing and it's not concluded, and I haven't got a time frame for when they may be.
Yvonne, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's fairly straightforward, I think. What we're talking about here are our lowest paid employees. We're not talking about paying a home working allowance for our well-paid, more senior officers. These are people who are already on the lowest of our pay grades, many of whom we already know from the report that we've seen recently about the number of benefit claimants in Wirral who are actually working, some 13,000 people in receipt of universal credit in Wirral who are actually working. So there is still a fair amount of in-work poverty, and we should not assume that there are none of those people who are actually working for us. Given that we are the largest employer, it's reasonable to assume that a percentage of those people are working for us. They're working at home because they're required to work from home because of government restrictions. And it is a lot more expensive when you have to have your heating on all the time. Okay, it's been, recent months it's been warmer, but all through the winter, and there's another winter on its way. And it's not easy to expect people to pay increased heating bills as we, as a council, sit back and save money, as we know we have done on having our buildings closed. We know we've saved over £1 million in terms of the buildings that we've had closed, and it would seem to me that paying out 80k out of what we've saved is not a very large amount in response as being good employers. So I would want to support and propose, in fact, that we do go ahead and pay the home working allowance as identified, using the criteria that are identified in this report.
Councillor Clements.
Thanks, Chair. Got it. I suppose I take a slightly different view from Councillor Nolan. Having read the report and heard that this is part of a national negotiation that's going on at the moment, which would affect us if it was agreed that way. I've read in the report that nobody else in the Liverpool City region is doing this. I know from various family members that other private companies don't do this. And the council has said that any employee who is adversely affected can come to work in a building that the council is opening. So therefore my suggestion would be actually that we do not adopt this proposal, and that we would continue and await the national negotiations. Thank you.
Councillor McManus.
Thanks, Chair. I would second the comments made by Councillor Nolan. I think that although you've said, Wendy, that the Liverpool City region have not adopted this, and that's in line with what the report says, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it may be Cheshire West have. So that is, they are close on our doorstep. I think as well that we need to consider that although some people may be going into council buildings to work, if everybody took up that offer, we probably wouldn't have enough spaces to fit everybody currently at the moment when we're being expected to stay at home. We're being advised by government to stay at home. And I think in terms of the HMRC allowance, that could well take some time for people to access that. I think it's simple enough to try and access it, but it's how long it takes for it to come through. So I would agree that I think our more lower paid staff should get this allowance. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, Okay. If everyone else... Phil.
Yeah. I've been listening to the comments made because I've taken a very cautious view about this myself. I think the world that we're in is changing. I think I spent years as chair of a committee trying to get the council to get rid of offices and merge buildings and reduce the amount of space that was available to each employee. And we went through buildings trying to reorganise our operations and introduce hot desking and a whole range of things. And of course, the whole world is now turned on its head, where you can't get people into buildings, certainly working closely together. But despite all that, I think it's not a matter that we can resolve on our own. And I say that because I think government will have to, it's not just council employees, but employees of all businesses, that the tax system nationally has to understand that people now work from home. Obviously, there are commuters down south paying thousands out in rail fares, getting to work, having a different form of flexible rail ticket now. But I think we need more detail on the ranges of employees. I did find out who's in Band H, but I think we need some more detail and some more investigative work in the politest sense to see how many are likely to qualify. I'm not sitting here as some 19th century employer. You'll remember Christmas in Scrooge's life, where the employee is afraid to ask for a bit more coal on the fire, or can I have half a day off, and worried about even making time for the family. We've moved a century and a half on from that and have a duty of care to our employees. But I think the general problem is one for our national employing bodies and the tax service itself to adjust to this new changed world, because the small amount that is available to help people living in and working at home nationally as part of the tax system, it seems so outdated itself, so the whole system needs overhauling. But I'm not convinced that even if we do our part by offering this, it's the right way forward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Anderson, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, Chair, it's just to say I agree with what Councillor Gilchrist and Councillor Clements has said. I mean, there is an issue. HMRC need to rectify this. There is a resolution there, and what I wouldn't want to do at the moment is have council employees who have to go into buildings because it's the nature of their role, one-stop shops who are, you know, some might be on, you know, cleaners, for example, who are on the lowest paid, then pit them against colleagues who sit at home. So I would happily second Councillor Clements' amendment or motion.
Councillor Cleary and then Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think I would just add the following comments, really. I think there's lots of areas where national legislation is deficient. That doesn't absolve us from trying to do the best we can. I think the measures that are outlined here are sensible and proportionate, given the circumstances we now find ourselves in. So on that basis, I would be happy to support the recommendations as outlined in the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I suppose it's a question, really, with regards to Wirral going it alone, although, as someone pointed out, Cheshire seem to have done something similar. Where does that leave us with regards to you mentioned there was a national negotiation going on. Now, we've always tried to implement, as I understand it, we've been part of the employers group with regards to terms and conditions. This, I take it, will be a breach of the compliance with the national employer group. Where does that leave us? Does that mean now that's been done, we've stepped outside the national employers' negotiated arrangements, and that would leave the council free to do a range of other things that were outside the national agreements that we have?
Okay, through you, Chair. I think we are, as a council, we are able to reach local agreements in relation to allowances, and we've done that in the past, and we have a number of different local arrangements in place. So I don't think we would be in breach of the national NJC agreement in that sense. Of course, what we would be is there may be a difference in what's introduced nationally, either greater or lesser than any local allowance that we put in, and we've developed our own criteria in the absence of anything else. So if it was agreement for a national allowance to be paid, then we'd have to review our own allowance in that context. But I think we would be able to introduce a local allowance if we deemed it was appropriate to do so, without falling foul of any NJC collective bargaining arrangements.
Chair, just to be clear, it is stepping outside the national bargaining arrangements, isn't it? Which I suppose, as you pointed out, we seem to have some precedents for that now. So that means we could choose to operate outside the NJC. In the past, there's always been, and quite rightly, I think, Chair, we've always taken the view Wirral operates within the NJC framework. As it seems that we're prepared to step outside of that, that allows the council a degree of freedom. So we've got those precedents now. So the council's free to step outside that, yes?
Again, through you, Chair, I think it largely depends on the matter in hand, really. So in terms of the key national pay discussions and the terms and conditions that are set out in the Green Book, there's still a staple that we would be tied to as part of that, and that's set out in employees' contracts of employment. It's always been the case that we have a mix of local and national terms and conditions, so this would be just an additional local agreement to go alongside others that are in place.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I don't view this as carte blanche for us to deviate from the national sort of policy framework, really. Is everyone who wanted to speak spoken? Okay, so as chair, I would just like to say that firstly, thank you for this. As you said, I did ask for this. Our colleagues in Cheshire West currently have a home working allowance. For what it's worth, I think the HMRC allowance is a pittance. I think our lowest paid workers, all of our workforce, have brought us through this pandemic and should be commended. Our lowest paid workers particularly have been harder hit. And so I am appreciative of the way that you formulated the criteria, Tony, and worked with the trade unions on this. So it won't come as any great surprise to say that I will be supporting this, caveated with the fact that it can be reviewed and will be reviewed. I just need to clarify, Councillor Clements, did you have an amendment on the table?
Thanks, Chair. Well, I guess my amendment is to propose that we do not adopt this working from home allowance at this time.
Be voting against it then?
Well, I was stating it in the positive way round to
no,
say
sorry, I was
that
just
we would decide to wait for the national negotiation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may assist, Councillor Clements, when she first raised this, voiced it in terms of a suggestion, but Councillor Anderson came forward and said he was seconding that. Thus, my question to you as to whether that was a proposal. It does seem from what Councillor Clements said that was a proposal. It is seconded, so that's what's on the table to be debated, Chair.
So in that case, we'll need to go to a vote? Okay.
Unless anyone's got any further comments.
Councillor Nolan.
Chair, I would suggest maybe Mr McCourt didn't hear me, but I did say that I proposed that we paid the home working allowance on the terms identified in the eligibility criteria identified in the report, and that, I believe, was seconded by Councillor McManus.
Apologies, no, sorry, I didn't hear you at that point. If so, then that did come in first.
And I would suggest then that Councillor Clements is not an amendment, it's a direct negation.
Yes, Chair. So I apologise. I didn't hear you at all. I didn't hear you say that, Councillor Nolan. I thought that was a comment in the discussion. So my apologies. In which case, that is a proposal, and that's what is to be debated. Forgive me, members, for that.
Can you confirm that you seconded that, please, Councillor McManus?
If I can get my mask off, yes, I second that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor.
I believe I'll take Councillor McManus's word for it, but I think she believes she said support it, not second it, but I'm not going to split hairs.
Do I have a seconder for Councillor Nolan's? Councillor McManus, thank you.
Yeah, if that has just been seconded, that sounds like a complete negation of the motion that was put forward by Councillor Clement.
No, my understanding, Chair, forgive, as I say, I did hear Councillor McManus said she would second that, but I didn't hear, I thought that was out of time, and I didn't hear Councillor Nolan's comment first, and it has been confirmed to me by colleagues that Councillor Nolan did propose that, and it was seconded by Councillor McManus. Thus, my apologies to Councillor Clements and Anderson. So, the proposal, Chair, is to adopt this allowance subject to the terms in the report and the review.
Chair, could I just have a ruling, please? Because if we're not careful, we get the first person that gets to say, I propose this, it means no one can put forward an alternative suggestion. So quite clearly, there was an alternative view that was proposed. Are we suggesting that's not going to be voted upon? Because that would be a bit of a nonsense then, really, wouldn't it?
Chair, if there are, subject to your comment and ruling, if there are two proposals, well then clearly they can only be voted upon one at a time if the later one is not does not fall under the conditions in terms of being an amendment. That is the case here. So there is one proposal to be voted on. If that falls, then it would turn to the second proposal to then be voted on, and so on.
You'll forgive me if I ask a question, Mr. McCourt, through you, Chair. It strikes me that Mr. McCourt is saying that the amendment that Councillor Clements put forward is a direct negative, but I could interpret it differently. What the leader, and I did hear Councillor McManus second it at an early stage, because I'm the advantage of having put these earphone things into this device, so I can now hear what's said as opposed to struggling. But that's sorted out. It seems to me that the leader, Mr. Nolan, Councillor Nolan and Julie are saying, let's go for this on the terms suggested now, whereas other members are saying, don't go for it, are not saying, don't go for it at all, but await the outcome of national negotiations, which does not strike me, Mr. McCourt, as a direct negative. It is a more cautious approach, but I'll listen to your advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair, if I may, this is a call for you, but in simple terms, I hear one proposal being pay this, but then review it. The other saying don't pay this, subject to review on the outcome of national negotiations. They appear on the face of it to be diametrically opposed, but that's just my simple understanding, and clearly that's a matter for you as members if you consider that to be something else.
I'm happy to go with that, thank you. Does anyone else have anything else to add to that before we go to the vote? Councillor Clements.
Thanks, Chair. I think if I recall it correctly, Councillor Nolan spoke, Tom asked some questions, I spoke, Julie seconded after I'd made a proposal. So we're all coming in and sort of almost chip chop, chip chop, chip chop. And perhaps for future reference, we might need to tighten up how we agree how we're going to proceed in matters like this. But I accept your ruling on this occasion. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, answering your question, Councillor Clements, yes, if, as I say, I didn't hear Councillor Nolan put that forward as a proposal rather than a comment. Otherwise, I'd have made a motion to the Chair to either look for a seconder at that point or actually say the alternative being actually we'll leave that for the time being to hear what others have got to say before we move to any formal debate to allow for discussion and questions. Those are the two alternative ways of handling it, but I should have heard what Councillor Nolan said and tapped the Chair on the shoulder, as it were.
Thank you for explaining that. I think we can make progress, can't we?
Yes.
Thank you. So can we move to a vote then? Thank you. You go. Okay. All those in favour of Councillor Nolan's?
Yes.
Thank you. So all those in favour of Councillor Nolan's proposal, please raise your hand. Thank you. Against?
Chair, that's 8 for, 6 against and no abstention, so that's carried.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Tony. Okay, so we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the appointment to Mersey Forest Steering Group 2021-22. And you're going to speak to this, Phil. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Members, you have before you an invitation from the Mersey Forest Steering Group, which is a body established by Natural England to appoint a member to it. It currently has one member from the 7 councils concerned, and it just falls to P&R to propose someone for that appointment.
So I'd like to propose Councillor Liz Gray. Was that seconded, Councillor Nolan? Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any... I'm just saying, do we have any other nominations?
Can I ask a question?
If you allow me to continue, you would have heard me say, do we have any other nominations?
Mine was a question. It was a point of procedure. So on the last ruling, if we propose anyone else, would that be considered a counter proposal, therefore wouldn't be voted upon?
Through you, Chair. The Council standing orders have a special procedure for appointments, and so that is to invite nominations and to vote for each of those nominations to the point where there are only 2 to choose from.
Thank you. Do we have any other nominations? We don't have any anyway. Thank you. In that case, Councillor Gray, you are appointed onto the Mersey Forest Steering Group. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So we're going to come on to section B, which is budget and performance management, and it's our revenue outturn for financial year 2021. And I'm going to ask Chair Halewood to present this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. So, yes, as the Chair just mentioned, this is the final outturn position for the Council's revenue account for last year. The background report, the background summary in the report actually gives an indication of how the position for the Council has changed throughout the year as a result of the implications of COVID-19 and the impact of that on our funding. So this information has previously been reported through member meetings on a quarterly basis throughout the year. And as you can see in the report, it clearly says how the situation was first reported at the end of Q1, the end of June last year, when little was known about COVID and about the funding that we would receive from the government, to really how that changed throughout the 3 quarters preceding the final outturn report that you have today. So just in terms of the last reported outturn, the last monitoring report was at the end of December, and this is where we had reporting a forecast adverse variance from budget of just under 9 million. And this 9 million figure was the figure that we used as part of the capitalisation direction or exceptional financial support, that it's also known as, and the position that MHCLG actually awarded us a maximum of up to 9 million capitalisation for last year. Since December, that position has changed, and the year-end variance to budget now is just over 6.5 million adverse. So it is actually an improved position than the last position that we reported at the end of December of around about 2.5 million. There are a number of reasons for this, really. The first being towards the latter end of the year, we did actually receive some additional funding from the Contain Outbreak Management Fund, and this enabled us, we hadn't anticipated to receive this funding at that time, and because we received this, it did enable us to offset some of the pressures forecast as of last year. And also, towards the last 3 months of the year, from January to March, we did manage to have an improved position on our savings achievement. And this was mainly due to things like vacancies that we still had outstanding that we couldn't fill. Buildings were still remained closed, and there was some savings from that. And also there was some staff expenses with travelling expenses and supplies and services, stationery, that type of stuff. That we actually overachieved on our savings that we actually forecast at the end of December. I suppose as well, we did try and report as much as an accurate position towards the end of December. And I think for last year, the situation that we found ourselves in, with not having experienced anything like this before, we didn't really know exactly what our year-end position would turn out. So it is a better position, it is better news that we're able to report a reduced adverse position. And as a result of that, that means our capitalisation direction for last year will equal the outturn position, and that's at 6.525 million. What this means is that our borrowing costs will be less, so we're actually having to borrow less than we thought we would. There'll be slightly less for this year, and these are being calculated at the moment, and we will report that back to you as part of the Q1 reporting that comes to committee in September. The recommendations in the report request the committee to approve an onward recommendation to full council to revise last year's budget in light of the total funding that we've received for COVID-19. So because it's a change in the budget, it is a full council approval. And as a result of the funding we received to support COVID, so this was funding received by the council to support the direct costs. The total funding that we received from that from government was just under 46.6 million last year. In addition to that, however, we have received additional funding to support the pandemic that we've actually passported or passed on to third parties in supporting them themselves. And this figure is just under 150 million. And the passporting of that includes the grants to businesses in terms of cash support, also the offsetting of business rates, so where some businesses did not have to pay business rates. There was reductions in council tax payments for claimants who were claiming the council tax reduction scheme. There was infection control funding that we passed on to the care sector and care homes. We had some self-isolation funding payments that we were able to pay over to people who were self-isolating and experiencing financial hardship. And also there was additional support to families for essential food and other essential supplies as well. Just in terms of the other recommendations in the report, there is an appendix that also provides information on the collection fund, so council tax and business rates, and the sundry debt summary and our collection rates for last year as well. And there is a recommendation that specifically asks the committee to approve the write-off of bad debts over £10,000. Anything under £10,000 is delegated to myself. And really, these debts of over £10,000, which we're actually asking the committee to write off, we have exhausted every possible way to recover these funds. So we are asking for write-off of those now. The details of the individual financial positions are included within the report by each individual directorate for members to note. And just a final thing, Chair, before I pause. This position is still a draft position. It has been included in our year-end statement of accounts that we've passed over to the auditors, but until the audit is concluded, this position is still a draft position for the end of the year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll invite questions or comments. Councillor Green.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, really. I'm sure, like me, you'd welcome the over £205 million that the government has given to Wirral residents and our businesses. It's been, I think, particularly generous and incredibly helpful to those families and businesses that have been struck by the pandemic over the last 18 months. And I'm sure you'd join with me in welcoming that and thanking the government for that. The other question I do have, though, because there is a whole series of narrative documents behind this, which is very interesting. But I was going through the, I think, on table 1, budget and outturn. Yep. So I could see what's happened at all the various departments that are listed there. So chief exec, resources, blah, blah, blah. And then it comes up to cross-cutting initiatives. And I couldn't, it's probably me, I'm more than happy to accept that I've missed it. But I couldn't find where there was the detail around that. And I've got a rough idea who is accountable for the budgets on these other elements? You know, that's your budget, that's what you've got to work on, you've overspent, why? But when you get to cross-cutting initiatives, I wasn't sure who it would be that we'd be holding to account for for doing so well, i.e. underspending, I suppose. But also, how do we manage that? So if we can't hold anyone accountable for it, or is there someone accountable for it? And how is it managed? Because to be honest, it's a bit of a new one on me. It might have been something the Cabinet introduced, I don't know. But that cross-cutting initiative seemed a bit of a new one on me. So a bit of help and understanding on that, Chair, would be useful.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Chair. So the cross-cutting initiatives are actually something that we've included in the table this year, just to kind of highlight what they are. Is that there was the savings that full council agreed in March 2020 that we were thinking at the time, throughout the start of the year, that we would be unable to achieve because of staff had been seconded onto other areas supporting the COVID pandemic. So at the start of the year, we were thinking that there would be about 11 million of savings that we couldn't be able to achieve. These are included in Table 23 in the pack, which is on page 63. What we did was we've collected them as cross-cutting because we haven't allocated them out to directorates where we weren't able to achieve them, because the thinking there was it wasn't specifically the directorate's fault that they couldn't achieve these. It's because we had to mobilise all the staff, take them all off the business as usual, and put them supporting the COVID pandemic. So really, they weren't, it wasn't through the fault of their own really that they weren't able to achieve. So what they are just the savings proposals that at the start of the year we thought we wouldn't be able to achieve as a result of supporting the pandemic. Now, we have actually been able to achieve those, some of those, which is why we've been able to bring the outturn down, the adverse outturn down from the start of the year. So Table 23 actually provides details of what the original savings were, how we've managed to achieve some of those, which is things like vacancy control, and then what was left in terms of what we've not been able to achieve. So we won't show that again next year, in this financial year. It was only just to highlight it separately because of the savings position we were in last year.
Chair, can I just follow up? So I'm right, it is a new thing, because I don't think I'd seen it before. So where it says cross-cutting initiatives, what we really mean are savings, yeah?
Yes.
Previously agreed savings. And where it says favourable, we mean unfavourable because we didn't make them, yes? In those terms. And the other thing, because you did mention no one was to blame and all that sort of stuff because of the pandemic. Are we then supposed to view that where we see an adverse, their savings were already taken off them? So these adverse positions, I think the Chief Executive's Office, neighbourhoods, legal and governance, are we supposed to say, well, we'd already agreed you didn't have to make the savings and you're still out because of COVID, but you still overspent? Is that, broadly speaking, what you're saying then? Because the way I understood things worked, savings, certainly from 12 months ago, would have been allocated to various directorates and so on, and they would have had their budget would have been adjusted to take account of that, and they then would have had to deliver it. Now, if we're doing something different, we need to, it would be useful to know, and we're sort of portraying that in a different way, or we're double counting, because I would have thought some of those savings would have been allocated. When you did the budget, Chair, 18 months ago, whatever it was, those savings would have been allocated to departments, and there would have been the expectation those departments would have made them. So, which is it really? Because it does seem, maybe it's just me, I just find it a little bit confusing. Are we double counting, and people just overspent even though we've taken all the savings they were supposed to make off them? So what does all that mean, presenting it in this sort of way, really?
Yeah, thank you, through you, Chair. So we would have allocated them ordinarily. When the savings are approved, we do allocate them through the individual directorates to achieve, and they are accountable for achieving their own savings. We didn't allocate some of these because more or less right at the start, it was evident that we weren't going to be able to achieve these savings. So the portion of these savings were held in a central code, if you like, because we hadn't done the work to actually allocate the savings before it was apparent that they wouldn't be achieved. So, for example, we had a new council model. There was capitalisation of salaries. There was contract reduction and zero-based budgeting. We hadn't done the work to actually allocate the detail of those to the individual directorates. So, for example, like capitalisation of salaries, we can't do that until the capital projects are actually ongoing. We won't know exactly as to where specifically those will be allocated. So at the start of the year, it became apparent that these weren't going to be achieved. We didn't allocate them because we didn't know at the time where they would be allocated. This only applied to last year. And we haven't done it before, and we haven't done it for this year. So when we actually report to you for this year, there won't be any cross-cutting savings. They will have all been allocated out to directorates.
I think what Councillor Green was asking, have they been double counted then?
No, they haven't been double counted.
Okay.
There's time to talk about it again at some point.
Well, that was the question you asked through. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Councillor Gilchrist. Actually, I do apologise. Councillor Gray's hand was up earlier. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. It's just going back to what Councillor Green was saying. Sorry? It's just going back to what Councillor Green was saying with regards to basically the generosity of this government. I just want to clarify a few issues because that struck me as a bit odd given the circumstances. Certainly in terms of when we're talking about the council's own finances, because it's my understanding that in terms of our own COVID costs, these ran to approximately 16 million, and we were allowed to, so far, and we were allowed to be reimbursed only 75% of 95% of our costs. And forgive me if I'm making a mistake here, but I believe that to be about 11 million. So if we've been reimbursed 11 million from our 16 million costs for COVID, I wouldn't class that as particularly generous of this government in terms of looking after people during a COVID pandemic. And this is 75% of 95% is claimable, but also only during certain months. So the government was only prepared to reimburse us during certain months. And I remember that parking charges were extended during months when we weren't being reimbursed. So I think the party opposite really should think again about claiming that the government is generous in terms of its COVID support, but also in terms of how we organise and how we pay for our residents' well-being and the services we provide during a COVID pandemic. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose just for clarification, Councillor Gray is right. That's the figures there specifically relating to the reimbursement of sales fees and charges for lost income. So in terms of sales fees and charges, we had lost round about 16 million of funding in lost income for sales fees and charges for things like properties like this being closed, that we weren't able to levy the sales fees and charges. Of that 16 million, we have been reimbursed of 11 million, so Councillor Gray's right in that respect. But on top of that, there has been additional funding that we have received from the tranche funding, from the infection control grant, from the business rate funding. So there is additional funding on top of that 11 million, which was specifically for the sales fees and charges compensation.
Just to clarify again, sorry, Chair, did that compensate for the difference between the 16 million costs and the 11 million reimbursement?
No, you are. Yes, you are right. So,
sorry, can we just allow someone to speak? Can we just allow someone to speak and to Chair to respond? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose just for a clarification.
Excuse me, can we give our colleague the courtesy at least of speaking, please, without you talking over?
So I suppose just to provide, just for absolute clarity, so the specific element of funding that Councillor Gray refers to is for compensation for lost income. The compensation scheme for lost income is that for any income that we're not able to claim because of premises being closed or for other reason because of COVID, the first 5% of that is not claimable, so we have to offset that. And then we can claim 75% back of all of the losses. So we haven't been able to claim back 100% of all the losses of sales fees and charges, compensation. And the figures of that is, of that 16 million that we are forecast to have lost, we have received 11 million back. So we are still out by 5 million, and that 5 million is forming part of our capitalisation directive because we weren't able to balance the budget for last year.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Did anyone want to? Councillor Green, you've spoken a few times. I'm going to bring Councillor Anderson in and then you back in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, I didn't want to speak on this, but since we're all going round on it, I've never known a government in 1 year to give 200 million to benefit, and it's not just what this council gets, it gives to other businesses for the outbreak management support in the payments as well. But, you know, we see in the reports here now, there's, you know, the pressures. I've never seen a report where there's been no pressures and it's actually been favourable in adults and children's as well. So I think we just need to recognise that support there as well. And, you know, if we're going to go on about, you know, the 75% of the 95%, then why on earth are we reducing the capitalisation bid by 10 million this year, or we're looking to do it there? That, you know, it just doesn't add up. But they're my comments, Chair.
Okay. I think Councillor Gray was referring to business support funding, which we administered directly to businesses. And whilst that was generous, it was the same as what anyone else got up and down the country. We didn't see the benefit as a council from that. Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to get to the bottom of this particular issue, because I think, well, I know Councillor Gray is correct in terms of suggesting that element of the funding was how it was allocated. But it is fair to say, isn't it, Chair, we got significant additional funding. So we had several tranches. So there was another 10 million, which I think has been referred to because it's going back. Well, the council, well, to reduce the capitalisation, where the council could utilise with no strings attached. So you could utilise that money however you wanted. And the council could, if it had wanted, have used that money to offset that loss in terms of the amount. So I think everyone's correct. I think Liz is right in terms of how that particular element was managed. But I think you have to see, if I may, the bigger picture in terms of the totality of the money that actually came. And whilst, of course, we did know better in those terms than anybody else, but the fact was, it was incredibly generous across the whole country and to local government. And I just thought you would like to take the opportunity to join with me in saying so. I don't think it's a particular sign of weakness to say.
I think I just have said,
done
actually.
well.
I think I did just say that the money for businesses was in keeping with what other businesses got around the country, and it was, yeah. I don't think there's any dispute in that one. Thank you, Phil.
Well, I'm happy to take part in this discussion about generosity. I mean, it's almost as though we're thinking of Moses wandering through the desert and the citizens of that period of time waiting for the manna to come down from heaven. We have a crisis of biblical precautions. We've been through it. Councillor Anderson says, well, your government's been generous. We couldn't imagine a situation where any government of any colour would not have had to act in these circumstances. So talking about someone being particularly generous has to apply to any composition of any lot, of any sort, trying to cope with this crisis. Because we were all in a situation where we had to stop doing things had to shut things down. People stayed at home. Certain people decided to go and break the rules at odd times, but the majority of citizens accepted the advice from the government and the place shut down. So it's not a question of generosity. It ought to be a question of a rational response to an emerging and continuing crisis. But within that crisis, there were times when the people could see that the government wasn't quite ready to do the right thing. And I'm thinking here of school meals and feeding families over Christmas, New Year and beyond. It took Marcus Rashford and other campaigners to say to the government, oi, this isn't right, you could do more, you ought to be doing more. And if I remember rightly, there was a point at which the Prime Minister had some difficulty remembering the footballer's name or even remembering that he was campaigning. So the situation is not as wonderful as some members have portrayed. We are going to spend the next 10 years or so picking up the pieces of this crisis and making a gradual return to a life in the new way of working, living with something that may end up being managed as well as flu, but living in a new world. So talking about everything being generous and implying, oh, it's great, well, thank you, government, it isn't quite on the right track, I think.
Thank you. There you go. Your comments were better received. There you go. I think everyone's had their say. I would just like to add that I don't think the 3 million people in the hospitality sector particularly think the government has been generous to them, but I'll leave that there.
Are you suggesting we should open early?
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to the recommendations. We've all had our discussion now. Thanks. Can I take it that we have all agreed the recommendations by assent? Oh, sorry, I'm going to propose that we accept the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. Can we take that by assent? There you go. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, Chair, it's you again for the next agenda item, capital outturn for the financial year 2020 to 21. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you've just mentioned, this is the year-end position for capital for the authority for last year. Again, the quarterly positions and forecasts have been provided through the Cabinet and then to the committee throughout the year as part of the regular budget monitoring process. Similar to revenue, really, the ability to complete all the capital projects during the year have been somewhat impacted by COVID with, again, the key staff who being diverted as part of their normal roles to directly support the pandemic have not been able to progress some of the or all of these capital projects and schemes throughout the year, and some of them have been delayed and been reprofiled into future years. The position at the end of the year then is a capital spend of 46 million, and this is compared to the forecast which was reprofiled at the end of December of 86 million. However, around about 30 million of this from the original schemes has been delayed, and as I say, it has been reprofiled into next year. So these projects will commence or continue in this year, and the funding and the expenditure will be reprofiled for that. Included in the report is a summary of the main projects in the appendices, and the schemes that have actually been completed during the year are included in the main body of the report via each directorate. The first two appendices provide the detailed movements so that you can track through the actual original capital programme at the start of the year and how that's actually moved during the year, including any reprofiling and any environments. To provide the final capital schemes for last year. And then the other appendices in Appendix 2 provide the detailed changes by directorate as to individual schemes as to what's happened and why they've not been progressed throughout the year. So Appendix 3 provides information on where the funding has been transferred by environment for individual schemes. And there is a specific recommendation as part of the recommendations that asks the committee for approval for these environments. And then finally, in Appendix 4, this just provides a refresher of the full capital programme that was agreed in March by each individual scheme and each individual directorate. So just in terms of this, Chair, similar to the revenue report, it is still subject to audit. So at this time, it is still draft. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cameron.
Hi, thanks. I'm just looking at Appendix 4, the revised programme after all the reprofiling and obviously the COVID impact. If we take neighbourhoods, for example, that goes over pages 96, 97 and 98, is it in some kind of order? It starts off, it looks alphabetical. It doesn't indicate that it's in date order or when it was added to the list, or it doesn't look like it's prioritised on a red, amber, green, or it doesn't look like there's a risk appetite or sense of delivery or sense of slippage. It just looks like a long list to me, and I can't get from this any sense of the possibility of it all being completed in this financial year, or any sense of substantial ones versus lots of little ones.
Thank you, Councillor Cameron. Yes, so this list is the full capital programme that was agreed at the start of the year. What's actually happened is, as the capital programme has been reported for monitoring during the quarters during the year, the changes will have been reported individually to each of those schemes. So that will have actually been happened and agreed by the committee or cabinet previously. So this Appendix 4 really is just for information, so it just shows you all the schemes that were approved at the start of the year. What we haven't got by individual scheme is what's happened to those in one table. So that is actually, as I say, it's been provided on the quarterly reports that have actually come. I mean, if you want that information, if the committee will find that beneficial, I can do that and send it round after the committee.
What you're describing sounds similar to the pages and pages I used to plough through at Audit and Risk, Audit and Governance for the Liverpool City region. It's an extensive list, but I get a sense of, so far, this looks like you confidently will achieve this in 21-22, and it's quite a long list. And I just have no sense of if that is all just going to happen concurrently, beautifully, smoothly.
Yep, so we will, as part of quarter one, which is the end of June, we will be bringing back to the committee on the beginning of September for this year's capital programme. So all of those schemes that are included in this year's and that have been reprofiled from last year's, we will bring you a list of all those and where they're up to and which ones we are now forecasting to be achieved. If there are any that for some reason won't be achieved or there's been a delay, we will bring that to you as part of the quarter one report in September. What I can do is have a look as to how we can best lay that out so it will be beneficial to you, so that you can track that through each quarter and see exactly what's happened to each scheme through each quarter. Yeah.
Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it is a very interesting report. I think it's a really good idea to have an indication of the achievability of some of this stuff. And I'm presuming each committee will also, as well as receiving their revenue budget, will receive updates in terms of the capital projects that they are running and whether they're on track and what's going on and so on and so forth. I'm presuming that will be part of the reporting mechanism. So committees will be able to view some of the bigger capital projects, some are small, but some of the bigger capital projects and whether they're on track or not. I suppose, quick question for me really, which leads on from what Helen had to say, was that in terms of the environments, are they environment or are they slippage? So are we, because we're not performing, we're not doing the capital programme, we're not following it through, there's a bit of delay on it, are we just bringing some schemes forward? So are they slippage schemes or are they completely new schemes that we're using capital that hasn't currently been spent? So is the programme the same and we're just reordering it, or are there new items that have been thrown in, if you know what I mean. I'm sure they don't get thrown in. I'm sure there's a very clear process about how they get in, but you know what I mean.
Okay, thank you for that. So I've just gone on your first comment. Yes. So each of the capital programme will be reported through the committees on part of the quarterly monitoring, and that will be in detail. Just in terms of the proposed environments in Appendix 3, I don't know the answer to that question off the top of my head, unfortunately. So in terms of that appendix for members on page 94, the schemes in there which the funding will be moved from and to, I don't know whether those schemes are not going ahead or whether there is slippage in those schemes. Now, if they are going ahead, they will form part of the Appendix 4. And I can just take a minute to have a look through those to see if they are in there. In terms of the proposed reallocation, so what's happened is there potentially be an underspend on the schemes or are not progressing, and it is planned that funding would then be used to schemes where they are overspent, which is the proposed reallocation.
Yeah, I don't want to detain the committee unnecessarily. I'm happy to get, if Cher could send us a note about, so you could have a bit of a look and just drop us a note for the exact position, if that's okay.
Yep, I will do, yep, Chair, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, clearly, when the building industry shut down, until working safety on site was resolved in many areas, then that would have a major impact on anything we've got planned. I wonder if I'd just ask if we could have an update on what the school down the road, the replacement of Riverside, because we've heard over many years about the age of the building, 1960s, and its structural problems, and requests to government for funding, which might have come under school condition and modernisation programmes. But I wonder whether we could be told where that stands currently, please.
Yep, I don't know the answer to that, Councillor Gilchrist, but we can provide that for you, no problem.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? No. Okay, thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose that we accept the recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Can we agree to accept the recommendations by assent? Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Next agenda item is the work programme. Film course, that's you.
Chairman Committee, this is your normal update of your work programme as laid out for the remainder of this municipal year, and it's before you for comment and any suggestions to go onto it.
Thank you for that, Bill. I don't see anyone wishes to comment on this, so I will just propose that we accept. We agree the recommendation to note the proposed work programme. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second that, Chair.
Who said that? Oh, thank you. Do we all agree by assent? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Chair, if I may ask on a point of procedure. So can I just have a bit of advice from Mr McCourt? I understand under the committee system, members can now what we call dissent, and if 40% of the committee agree, then it goes to a higher authority. I'm just trying to, which in this case for this committee, next committee would be full council. I'm just wondering if I can move that now before the meeting closes.
Chair, if I may, Councillor Anderson is correct. Within the new committee system, there is a mechanism by which a committee's delegation can be removed. That's either from a motion of the committee itself or 40% of its members notifying the chair by the close of the meeting. In this case, that will be a minimum of 6 members. So, Chair, if you could ask members to identify themselves as to those who would consider delegation removed for Councillor Anderson to identify the debate in hand.
Thank you, Chair. It was item number 6, the home working policy. I'd like to register my dissent. May I just, I don't know if Councillor McLaughlin needs to, apologies, leave the room again, or, but my,
Thank you, Councillor.
My question would be, since Councillor McLaughlin was not in the meeting participating, will that reduce the 40, not the figure?
Yes, presence and voting.
Okay. Yeah.
So 40%. And 40% of 14 is still 6, is it? 5.6, yes, so it would still be 6 members, Councillor. Forgive me. Unless you have a...
I worked another scenario out, but we'll see. Okay, so I'll register my dissent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for clarity, members, clearly if delegation is removed from policy and resources, that means the matter goes directly to full council. Chair.
Phil Gilchrist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been told, I think, that council isn't happening in July, it would be September. Whilst we had a useful debate on this item, and I think the committee was unwise to take the course of action it did, I'm not prepared to stand in the way of a move which a number of members feel is wise in the circumstances and where staff may be out experiencing some financial difficulty. I made my point about the scheme being unwise, but I'm not prepared to go to the extent of standing in its way and preventing any progress on it.
Thank you. So show of hands.
Yeah, it's not for debate.
Well, it's just been advised it's not for debate, given no more debate, so we can just have a show of hands then. Jeff, pay attention. Okay, well,
That's 5.
yep. Even my crude mathematics tells me that's not.
Chair, another point of procedure. So if there's 14 members voting, then 5 divided by 14 is 0.357. Would that rounded up be the 40% threshold?
I would look at it the other way round, if you forgive me, Councillor Anderson. So it's 40% rounded to the nearest whole member. So that would be 6. Thank you.
Do we need to show of hands the other way, or is that done?
Show of hands, Chair, it's 5. So
Okay.
remains with the committee.
Okay, so that remains with committee. Thank you. Can someone bring Moira back in? Or can she hear me? Sorry, so had we got through the work programme and the votes on the work programme? Well, there wasn't a vote, it was we agreed by assent, didn't we? Okay, we had done that. Thank you. So we move on to section D, which is referrals from committees or council. 11 is referrals from Economy, Regeneration and Development Committee. 11A is active travel funding. So members, before I invite officers and the committee chair to present the report, I would like to highlight the recommendations we will be asked to consider this evening have been circulated to members in a supplementary agenda via email, as they are different to those published in the original report. Officers will now clarify any further when they present the report. So can I ask either Phil or Alan to present the report, please? Alan, will it be you? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So as it's a referral from the Economic Regeneration and Development Committee, I wasn't planning on presenting the report. It was just to say that the amended minute is now in front of members. So if it's okay through you, I'll take any questions. I'm not sure if Phil would like to say anything more on the amendment made through the extra item.
Chair, I would only add that this is a referral here because of the amount of money involved, and forgive us for the clerking error in terms of those minutes, but that's been corrected in the later publication.
I'm going to bring Councillor Rennie in first, because you haven't spoken tonight.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just for clarification then, so what is being put forward tonight does include the resolved by assent that you're asking for here at P&R. It's 1, 2, 3 and 4, and the fourth paragraph clearly makes reference to Wallasey and New Brighton Ward. Can I just have clarification that that's right, and in fact that part will be deferred at the moment because clearly there's been a complete debacle on the promised consultation right from the outset, and thank you very much to officers who've actually had that corrected now. Am I right in that?
Thanks, Councillor Rennie. Yeah, that's correct. So the discussion took place at the Economic Regeneration and Development Committee. So the proposal is now that the scheme will go ahead in parts, so we can have that further consultation to enable the first part to go ahead, so we don't lose the money, if you like, but for further consultation to take place as well.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted open clarification on that. Thank you.
Okay. Liz, your hand was up next, and then Tom.
Thank you, Chair. It's just that in the light of the of discrepancies between votes and actions following meetings of the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee and Economy, Regen and Development Committee, I have a proposal to add to these recommendations.
Okay. So could you lean into your mic a bit more, Liz, because I'm struggling to hear you.
Do you want me to say that again? Yeah, it's just in the light of just some discrepancies between the votes and actions following Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee and Economy, Regeneration and Development Committee, I have a proposal just to enhance clarification of the situation for everybody involved, and it just involves additions to the recommendations.
So we'll have a discussion first, and then you can read it out.
Yeah.
Okay. And Tom, your hand was up next.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like clarification first from Mr McCourt. Can P&R add recommendations from other committees, and if it's gone to both?
If I may, Chair, yes, this is a decision for P&R, and indeed I go further and to say that the committee shouldn't fetter its discretion by simply accepting what's been referred to it. It's for P&R to consider those matters put to it. So yes, it can add its own deliberations and decision.
Super, thank you for that. So in light of that, I was going to raise my concern actually that the active travel fund is actually for active travel. It's not just cycling, important as it is. It's actually for walking, and I don't see any improvements for people walking to work or gaining access on there. So I'd like to actually refer it back to the Economy and Regeneration Committee to look at that with a view to adding walking schemes in that will benefit the borough. Thank you, Chair.
So, do we have anyone else that wishes to speak? Pat Cleary.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Gray has already referred to some issues, discrepancies, I think she called them, between the Environment Committee and the Regeneration Committee with regard to active travel. I think that there's been some kind of email discussion between councillors around this topic, and there's clearly a divergence of views. I know that we obviously have a new constitution that we're working with since the committee system came in, and obviously we have the Constitution and Standards Committee, which under its remit looks at the constitution and has the remit to examine that and to suggest any changes given the bedding in process that we're going through. So I also have if it's okay, I also have a suggestion for the committee, which I'm happy to read out in due course, but it basically asks this committee to ask the Constitution and Standards Committee to look at the terms of reference and the detail within the Constitution with regard to the implementation of active travel schemes, and to make any appropriate recommendations that see fit. and I'm happy to read that wording out in due course. Just quickly in response to what's been suggested by Councillor Anderson, I would point out that one of the recommendations specifically refers to additional consultation around the Crescent in West Kirby. I see that as definitely a pro-pedestrian proposal that we're looking at, so I wouldn't agree that there's nothing in the pack that actually wouldn't benefit pedestrians.
Thank you. Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. I did start some correspondence with members of the various two committees involved to make sure I could appreciate some of the nuances about the programme. There seemed to me a difference between a great vision and a plan and then the next level looking at things in detail, but members had views on aspects of that. So wearing my hat as chair of the Constitution and Standards Committee, I'm happy to receive representations about the best way to proceed on that. I would point out that now that I've, as it were, not a member of either of the two committees that have been discussing the matter, I spent 20 years probably as chair of what was at one time the Cycle Forum, the Pedestrian Forum, then became the Active Travel Forum. And we spent many years literally trying to find funds to improve a lot of pedestrians and cyclists, and we're lucky that there has been a change of heart by national government. For once, I'm actually saying, thank you, Boris. I thought you might like that, but yeah, I thought you like that. But last July, the government did issue the document called Gear Change, and it is about both cycling and walking. So when I was a member of the forum some 2 years ago now, and we were asked for short-term quick wins for schemes, I did put forward the idea of getting from Tesco at Bidston through to Morton along those roads, and it was taken up. And that is a scheme that has legs, if you'll forgive the pun. So, but it's down to, there's no point in blocking the schemes that we've got in the hope of finding some future funds for walking. The important is to make progress with what we've got and to create more schemes that we can get bids in for to change the way travel is perceived, to improve the safety of cyclists, to stop motorists thinking that cyclists shouldn't be on the road, thanks very much, or whatever, or to change the attitude of motorists towards people who are pedestrians, thinking that they should be always pushing their way through in their cars and not having good regard to the other road users or walking people. So I think it'd be a mistake to knock these schemes back on the basis that there's not enough in them for walking, but I'm happy to look at the way things could be progressed in future at the Standards Committee.
Okay, thank you. I think everyone has contributed to the debates. I know there were several proposals / amendments on the table. I've lost track a bit now, to use another terrible pun. Sorry. Liz said that you would read your formal words out first, so is that the way we're going to proceed? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. It's basically to clarify the situation for everybody involved going forward, to approve the recommendations as they are, but to include in recommendation 3 the chair and spokespersons of the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee, so that both committees are mentioned there equally, and to include everything else that's there, to add an additional recommendation that members note the significant overlap between the terms of reference of Economy, Regeneration and Development Committee and the Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport Committee, and request that these committees work jointly with Economy and Regeneration leading on active travel issues which affect major regeneration master plan projects, and Environment, Climate Emergency and Transport will lead on all other transport, active travel and road safety strategy and schemes. Officers are asked to liaise with the chairs of both committees on all transport planning to ensure that the work programmes are always agreed. And there's an additional 6th recommendation, which I think will fit with what Councillor Cleary has just said about referring to constitution and standards to see whether the existing provisions need to be changed, constitution needs to be changed to keep up with this steer from this committee, and to make sure that they are clear and appropriate.
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you. Chair, can I just check, because Councillor Anderson moved his proposal earlier and seconded by Councillor Green. So was that to add an additional recommendation to, an additional item to refer a question back to the committee for them to consider, or was it to refer the whole matter back to the committees to start again?
I think it was to refer the whole matter back to committee, not to start again, but to review it, to look at with the for more walking schemes in the borough. So it's to refer it back.
So Chair, that's the proposal that's for voting. It's whether or not Councillor Anderson would be willing to accept those two additional recommendations which stand alone. No, so that's an amendment then, presumably from Councillor Gray, to add two additional recommendations to there's currently a proposal to refer the matters back. Then there is an amendment to be voted upon first from Councillor Gray, presumably to just add those two latterly points, which is for the two committees to work together in that process and for a referral to standards. So that amendment is to be considered first. Not the recommendations, because what's currently on the table, Chair, is to refer the whole matter back. So it's whether or not in doing so there will be consideration of Councillor Gray's comments, or whether Councillor Gray would wish to reserve her proposal until the vote on referring the whole matter back is disposed.
And leave that to the Chair.
Councillor Cleary had your hand up as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. As I indicated, I've got an additional recommendation, so I think it might be sensible if I read that out, and then maybe Mr. McCord could, if we can get a second or further support for that, if Mr. McCord can advise where that would sensibly fit in.
Can do, Chair, although, as I say, at the moment, there is a proposal to be voted on to simply refer this matter back. So the question to Councillor Gray. Are you happy, Councillor Gray, for your amendment, your comments to be an amendment to the proposal to refer back? So that's voted on first, or would you wish to withdraw it for the moment until the proposal to refer back has been voted on?
If I can have the amendments voted on first, then I'd prefer that, but it's up to you and the Chair.
So Chair, that would be the proposal is to refer back.
So when you say refer back, refer everything back?
Refer everything back.
Okay.
And as I understand what Councillor Gray will be wishing to do then, is the proposal will be to refer back with an amendment of two additional items. One, which is that the two committees work together, and two, that Constitution and Standards do a review of the terms of reference of this group.
I think it would be easier perhaps if we just vote on Councillor Anderson's first.
So, thank you. So withdraw for the moment. Chair, it's therefore a simple vote.
I think that's the wrong word.
It's a simple vote as to whether or not to accept Councillor Anderson's current motion, which is to refer the whole matter back for the committee to consider walking within that collection of projects.
Show of hands?
Yes.
Show of hands, please. Yep. Against?
So, Chair, that
Cool.
so that falls 5-4, 10 against, no abstentions. So Chair, you now have a, what I understand to be a new proposal from Councillor Gray, which is, as she read it out, and then the potential for an amendment from Councillor Cleary.
Just to clarify on that one, because I think it was included in yours anyway, was it to refer to standards? No, there's a lot of talking going on over there. Would someone actually like to speak through the chair? Councillor Cleary.
Yeah, just for clarification, the way I heard what Councillor Gray said was she had two suggestions. One was to include the Environment, Climate, Emergency and Transport Committee in recommendation 3 as an addition, and then there was an additional recommendation around the overlap between the committees and where the kind of division would fall. What I'm suggesting is a further recommendation, that would be a recommendation 6, that this committee asks the Constitution and Standards Committee to consider whether the existing provisions within the Council's constitution with respect to the planning for and the implementation of active travel schemes are sufficiently clear and appropriate, and if necessary to make recommendations to Council on any necessary changes to the Constitution. So that's what I'm suggesting. I think that is in really addition to the 2 specific proposals that Councillor Gray made.
Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Gray?
Just to say that is what we've got as our 6th recommendation in here. So yes, I'm sure that's perfectly acceptable to everybody.
So, Councillor Tony Jones and then Councillor Tom Anderson and then Moira. Thank you.
That's implicit in Councillor Gray's recommendations, which I seconded, Chair.
Thanks.
Moira?
Thanks. Yes, and I took it as that actually, but it is really difficult to hear in here. But I did catch that the last recommendation was to send it to standards to have a look at it. But can I just say that the active travel isn't the only cross-cutter here, because we've got things like the domestic violence, domestic abuse strategy. So we can keep on referring them as they come up if you want, or we could try and get some sort of a compilation of those issues which could sit in one or other committee and get standards to look at it from that perspective, which seems to be more sensible than dealing with them one by one as they come up, or one by one where people have got particular interest in them.
Thanks, Moira. Councillor Anderson, you had your hand up, and then Councillor Green.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to completely say what Moira was going to say. There's a plethora. I mean, it's probably unfair to ask Alan now because we haven't got the Director of Neighbourhoods here, but there is an issue here with Regen and neighbourhoods. Neighbourhoods have to execute in terms of its maintenance, its revenue budget, whereas Regen can just say, we've got this bid, let's put it here.
Okay.
And it's about the cross-cutting of those directorates. So really, it's about the ongoing revenue as well that needs to, where does that sit?
But we have got a vote. I mean, we've had a proposal and a second now,
yeah,
so...
But there's an amendment, so I thought we could debate it. Is that not possible?
Okay.
So it wasn't a debate, really. It was just to ask that question of the Director of Regeneration, if you had the answer.
Through you, Chair, if I can. Thanks, Councillor Anderson. So in terms of the current constitutional arrangements, so the best way to describe it is that network maintenance would sit within the Environment Committee, and then the local plan aspects, so the master planning, the regeneration planning, would sit within economic regeneration and development. So there is some jurisdiction between the two, but there is, I appreciate what's been said this evening, there's some crossover which has caused some confusion.
So can I be helpful, Chair? In that case, I'm perfectly happy to have standards look at that and accept Councillor Gray's amendment.
Would be helpful, yes. Has everyone said what they wanted to say on the debate then? Do we need to move to a vote? All those in favour of Councillor Gray's? Unanimous? Thank you. Thank you, members. So do we move on? Is that it then? That one's done. Thank you. So now we move on to our urgent item, which is COVID-safe operations and facilities. And Phil McCourt and Julie Webster, you're going to present this. And
Thank you, Chair. If I open briefly and then follow up. So, members, this is an urgent item. It's been accepted by the Chair for reason of the special circumstances of the changing picture of public health advice concerning the spread of the Delta variant of COVID-19. The Chair of the committee has stated that it was her opinion that it should be considered as a matter of urgency, which is why it wasn't on the agenda. That will be recorded in the minutes. Members, you have before you, and I'm sure you will have all heard the statement from the new Secretary of State on Monday about the end of current restrictions expected to be 19th July. What that leaves for the Council with a number of venues is the likelihood of further advice that may change rapidly, and how the Council should go about responding to any particularly rapid changes. At that point, Chair, I'll defer to Mrs Webster.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to give you an update on where we're at with regard to the latest COVID-19 data. I'm sure you're all fully aware that case numbers have increased. We've certainly seen since the 17th of May a substantial increase in our COVID cases, and you'll also be aware that Liverpool City region and actually the North West is at the epicentre of the increase in cases. But it's happening across the country, that numbers are going up, which was always to be anticipated as people mix more. We are, though, as Liverpool City region and as the majority of the North West, now part of an enhanced support area as designated by the government, which means that we do have access to additional support with regard to surge testing and if we need support, for example, around the vaccination programme. I do anticipate the lifting of the final lockdown restrictions on the 19th of July, and I do believe that will lead to further increase in cases as people mix more. COVID has not gone away, and it's not going to go away for some time, if at all, in our lifetimes. And it is something that, obviously, we've now got other things that we can use now to help us to live with COVID, which is not a phrase I like, but seems to be one that's in common parlance. So what have we got now that helps us to actually deal with the virus that we've got? Obviously, the vaccination programme, we've got a comprehensive testing programme within the borough and tracing, and we've got local solutions to support self-isolation. But I must continue to advocate caution because, as I say, the data is definitely telling us that, unfortunately, we're seeing that increase within the borough. Another good news story, though, of course, is at the moment it's not translating into hospitalisations in the same way that we saw in January, February this year, and obviously March, April of last year. But just to give you a quick update on the figures, our unvalidated figures up to the 27th saw 833 cases in the 7 days to the 27th. Back in May, I was talking about numbers of 5 or 6 per day. And actually on the Monday just gone, the 28th, we had 229 cases on one day. So this is leading to significant pressure on the local COVID hub and obviously disruption to people's lives. The current surge and spike in our cases is very much due to the Delta variant. I thought as well, just tonight, just very briefly before I finish, just talk a little bit about children and young people, because that's obviously been very much in the news. Within the borough now, we've got just over 3,300 pupils self-isolating, which is a lot, but it's about 6% of our total pupil population. And I want to just say thank you to schools, head teachers, parents, etc., who've been really supportive of us keeping as many children in school as possible. We've also got around 250 staff self-isolating, which is about 5% of all school staff. So they are big numbers, but if you look at the percentages, then you can see that we are still keeping lots of our children in schools and having an education. We've got about 60 of our educational settings affected. I do believe that when schools come back in the autumn term, there will be changes with regard to school bubbles, etc. But obviously we need to wait for those policy changes to be announced by central government. So I suppose I just want to finish really to say we're obviously under significant pressure because of the case numbers that we've got within the borough. They're not translating into hospitalisations, but they are leading to major disruption. And obviously we need to see this vaccination programme absolutely rolled out to as many people as possible so that we can keep as many people safe. Hence why this paper's in front of you. Thank you.
Chair, if I may pick up from there. The situation as a result of these figures being put before the Chief Executive Management Team was therefore how the Council should respond. Arguably, it is within Directors' delegated authority to make decisions on a case-by-case basis. However, that misses the loop of both primarily informing and involving yourselves as members, but also informing the public in terms of public information. The proposal then before you is to endorse that the case-by-case decisions that officers may need to take and that those will be taken on the basis of three criteria. One being responding to the government's and public health guidance. So if a venue cannot conform with that guidance, it may need to vary its operation or indeed have the venue suspended. The ability to function, because it may be that disruption from school closures, availability of staff, moving staff to other higher priority areas may also mean certain functions need to be varied, suspended or ceased temporarily. And then lastly, in terms of opening up, it may be that certain of our commercial venues could not operate in an economic manner if they were to either comply with those guidelines or be able to respond to other issues. So those are the criteria included within the recommendation to you. The only other thing I would add for your perhaps consideration is whether to leave the recommendations as they are as your proposal or insert a mechanism by which you as Chair and Group Spokes, i.e. Group Leaders, were consulted in that process. Chair.
Yeah, so there's checks and balances there for members on the decisions. Moira.
Thanks, Chair. And it's not to query the recommendations that are there. It's a question for the Director of Public Health, really. Well, possibly goes wider than your remit. On the number of children that are out of school, which I think you gave us 3,600, do you have any kind of a breakdown about secondary or primary school pupils? But the real nub of my question is, have we got any mechanism for identifying how many of those children are eligible at any one time for free school meals and what is being done to fill that gap, albeit for only a week or so, but nevertheless, it is a factor that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. So I can tell you that the cases that I read out and the settings that are affected, it's 32% are in primary school and 57% are in secondary. For those of you who like to count up, 4% are in early years and 7% are the post-16s. With regard to your question around free school meals, we should be highlighting that connection through the self-isolation support that's offered through the COVID hub, but I will take that away and make sure that we are.
Thank you. Yvonne?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, in general, the proposals seem sensible. They seem a very reasonable response to an increasingly concerning situation, although clearly not as serious as we were facing this time last year. The situation's very different. It's a very different sort of disruption. So we don't have the hospitalisations and thank goodness we don't have the deaths, but what we do have is a huge amount of disruption in terms of availability of people in the workforce because they have children who are isolating or they're having to isolate themselves as a result of the rapid spread of the Delta variant. So I do absolutely understand, and I think that we should always follow clearly the public health advice as the situation has deteriorated, and I suspect will continue to do so. I share the concerns of the Director of Public Health that as restrictions are lifted, that we will see further increases in this way. So I don't expect things to improve anytime soon. So whilst I would support those recommendations, and hopefully we will see that support from right across this committee. I mean, unfortunately, we've seen opportunistic comments in the local press, which I think are quite disgraceful, about the opening, for example, of this building to give councillors air-conditioned comfort for their meetings. There's been no additional cost to the councillors to meet here, apart from the costs of the IT requirements to make these meetings available to the public, because this building was already opened, partly because of visitors coming to New Brighton and partly because of our lateral flow testing centre that was here. So no additional costs have been incurred by doing that, and unless you were suggesting that we should meet on the beach or perhaps perhaps in a car park, maybe. Perhaps that would be your idea of an ideal place to meet for council meetings. But given those comments aside, because they're really not worthy of spending much time on. Thank you, Councillor Green. I wasn't inviting a discussion. As I say, they're not really worthy of us spending much time on.
Excuse me, a member still speaking here.
Yeah, she is indeed. So what I would propose is that we support those recommendations, but in the case of where it is a question of decisions, delegated decisions being taken in respect of public safety and public health concerns, absolutely that can be delegated. Where we are looking at buildings unable to function or buildings unable to open because of financial considerations, that should be in discussions with the relevant chair and spokes.
I'm happy to second that, but we will move on with the debate because there's several hands up. Tom, I think yours was next.
Thank you, Chair. And at the beginning, I was about to agree with everything Yvonne said. So I think this is needed, it's necessary. The recommendations are proportional, the criteria is proportional. So I'm not too sure. I think leaders, in consultation with leaders, if we start going further down, then it might just take much time and there's an urgency matter there. But, you know, I just have to say to Councillor Nolan, when I won't take any lectures from you, when it was your members that disregarded the Director of Public Health advice and voted for a certain item. So, you know, before we start hurling things across this room, just remember that. Thank you, Chair.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Gilchrist, Councillor Green.
I'm naturally a cautious person, but I've listened carefully to what the Director of Public Health has said, and we do appear to be in a fast-moving situation. I'm quite happy as a leader to be involved in sensitive discussions when there are decisions to be taken, to offer advice, support, or debate on the merits of something. I am interested in this commercial aspect, though. I could do with understanding a little bit more around that. We had a discussion an hour or so ago about the 5% and the 75%. So if officers feel that we can't open a building that might generate income, and we take a specific decision that it's on commercial grounds, then presumably there's a calculation to be made, and income foregone would be being worked out, or the risks of accepting that income and spreading the virus would be being worked out. So I'm wondering, there's a fund which has several £1 million in to be used over the next year or so through to September 22. And Julia, remember, the director will remember the name of the fund because I've just forgotten it now. But I'm wondering whether we would have access to that to call on if we were taking decisions about finance, to give us some comfort. But at the same time, it would stop us teetering on the brink thinking, oh, we actually need some money from this. No, we don't, we can forego it. It's that kind of discussion that we might have on certain things.
If I may, Chair, there are perhaps two scenarios on economic grounds. One being where we expect revised guidance to be issued shortly. The Council is in the process of remobilising a venue, which may take considerable investment to get it ready to open, but we know revised guidance is coming, so there may be the sensible decision to just await that guidance before making that large investment, is one example. The other is exactly as Councillor Gilchrist said, which is where perhaps social distancing would mean a venue wouldn't be economic, and of course at that point discussions will be held with Chev and with her colleagues at MHCLG about how funding might be used and reprioritised.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the concern, I know in my own group, was that we don't allow the finances to override public health and decisions to be taken around buildings that we wouldn't agree with on the grounds of public health. Should we just, so it's just checks and balances really for members when the decisions are taken. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, the recommendations seem sound to me, and I think Mr. McCourt has got a point about inserting the right level of oversight of some of the decisions that officers may or may not need to take. What that level is, I think people had suggested it was at a leaders and deputy stage. I don't know, I'll leave that to people that have that overview. I suppose the thing that concerned me the most, and why I'm glad this has been brought tonight, was that just reading in the paper that the Director of Public Health had recommended and made a point to a committee, and senior members on that committee, a particular group on that committee actually, decided to completely ignore that advice, and that I found absolutely shocking. And I hope we would all agree in this room that that was a mistake, and a serious mistake, and that we should be led by the experts in this particular area, and we should show a degree of respect for the advice that the Director of Public Health gives when she has to give it, and we should listen and, in my opinion, certainly scrutinise it, but take it. And what I approve of in this set of recommendations is I believe that's what will be the case going forward. And I think it was a shocking dereliction, and I'm glad that the council has moved, and you, Chair, have moved quickly to bring this particular issue to the committee for us to be able to respond to it, so it can't happen again. And I do hope, Yvonne, that whilst you're making all sorts of accusations about other people, that you take some internal action in your own group about what on earth your members were playing at. Thank you,
I
Chair.
think we're going to finish that there, actually, and I think I'm just going to go. Everyone's had their say now. Should we just go to the vote? Councillor Nolan's proposal.
Chair, if I may, Councillor Nolan made a comment in her additional proposals. If I can just reflect back to ensure I got that correct, which will be to add a number 3 or a number 1A if you prefer, which is where there is to be a variation proposed as a result of prioritisation or economic considerations, then any decision should be in consultation with the chair and group spokespersons, i.e. the group leaders. So, thank you.
Okay. So I think that's been, and you have to second it. That's been agreed by assent. Well, that's the end of the meeting in this, I hope you've all enjoyed luxuriating in this wonderful air conditioning, which doesn't seem to be